Electromagnetic radiation exposure over 40 years ago and my experiences today. Over 40 years ago, I had a brief exposure to microwave radiation, in intensity enough to cause a heating effect instantaneously on the left side of my face. At that time, I did not think much about the experience other than I did not expect such a blast of heat from equipment. This was before microwave ovens were common household items. Few of us were aware of the potential of microwaves to cook, or knew that at that time the Soviet Union was using microwave radiation as a so-called non-lethal weapon against the U.S. Moscow embassy staff. That night was a sleepless night, wondering about the strange heating sensation I still felt on the side of my face. At the time of the exposure, I did feel an atypical headache when the unit was turned on, heard a drone or sound the others could not, and an unusual disorientation, etc. At that time, none of us would have recognized the symptoms of microwave radiation poisoning, a poisoning that would affect me in subtle ways during the next almost 30 years. Almost 30 years after the exposure, I began to experience a massive, almost constant headaches. After a short while, I was diagnosed with a massive acoustic neuroma tumor. This tumor is one of the ones that was the prime reason why the World Health Organization Subcommittee, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, classified radiofrequency or electromagnetic radiation as a Group 2B carcinogen. An acoustic neuroma's correct name is a vestibular schwannoma, a benign primary intracranial tumor of the myelin-forming cells of the vestibular cochlear nerve or 8th cranial nerve, with a latency period of 10 to 30 or more years. Not a cancer, but would involve cutting the skull open to remove most of the tumor between the brain and brainstem. In my case, the first operation was 11.5 hours. Benign or not, it's still a serious situation. After the operation, I not only had to learn how to walk again, I even needed to learn how to sit up again. I was deaf in one ear, have compromised balance, and on the left side of my face, a facial numbness and paralysis on half my face. Approximately 10 years later, I had an additional 8+ hour surgery to remove some residual tumor that had grown to a very large size. It was while recovering from the second surgery that I experienced severe electromagnetic hypersensitivity effects, massive headaches, and severely itchy skin. At the time, the effects were dismissed as dry skin and after effects of brain surgery. No one considered the several-month-long constant exposure to the high level of EMF, typically that found in a hospital environment, was the cause of the itchy skin or headaches. Being released from hospital was the best thing for me, but until they knew the cause of my headaches, I should not have been released. Shortly after I was discharged to a relatively lower EMF environment, the symptoms began to abate. Then I started to use a laptop and wireless router. As it was a laptop, of course I used it on my lap. I did make sure the laptop did not vent heat down and the base remained cool. After several weeks, the itchy skin returned, particularly in the legs, and to an extreme, the foot next to the router became itchy to the point of pain. I spoke to my MD about the matter, and he prescribed a cortisone cream. It was only minimally effective, and no one should use such a cream regularly. I began to think about the possible causes and realized that the most likely cause was the computer, especially in its Wi-Fi mode. After a quick rearrangement of things and a wired or Ethernet connection, and within a few days the problem was gone. Decided to avoid EMF as much as practical and left things at that. Several months later, there were several news items about Wi-Fi in schools, and as I had had a negative experience with Wi-Fi, I started to study the subject of Wi-Fi in schools. During the next few months, it became clear that there was a reason to not use Wi-Fi anywhere, and in particular schools and seniors' homes. One should restrict their use and contact with it. They should also restrict their use and contact with cell phones and cordless phones at all times. A particular concern was how few people paid any attention to the safety warnings in the manuals that came with these devices. Even more serious, one realized that the safety warnings were nowhere near strict enough to protect the public. Employees assigned to these devices by their employer. I contacted the local Workers' Compensation Board, or as it is known in BC, WorkSafe BC, to suggest that when an employer assigns one of these devices to require the employee to read the safety manual. Later, while doing more study on the issue, I began to realize I was reading too much about my life experiences, and I too was suffering from radiation poisoning, the poisoning that was caused by unprotected exposure while working over 40 years ago. The next step was to file a claim with WorkSafe BC and to begin an extensive period of serious investigation into the issue. The more I learned, the more I realized how serious the issue is. Learning to live with the effects of radiation, and in particular the after effects of carcinoma, is not a good experience, and one that I do not want to see others have to deal with. Unfortunately, far too many of those in authorities such as WorkSafe BC, utility providers such as BC Hydro, and the Provincial Medical Health Officer in BC do not wish to look at and understand the proven harmful effects of radiation, preferring to rely on their own personal biases and not supported by independent peer-reviewed scientific research. Smart meters are contributing to the insidious spread of EMF in the environment. They are adding their EMF to the EMF already being released into the environment from the proliferation of smartphones and other personal communication devices such as iPads, cordless phones, cell towers, and more. We are immersed in a smog, an electromagnetic smog. During my study of the topic, I came to realize how inadequate the Canadian standards are. The Canadian standards are covered by Safety Code 6 and allow for a 6-minute exposure to 1,000 microwatts per square centimeter. Countries that have studied the subject in depth and have even considered using the microwave radiation as a non-lethal weapon. A non-lethal weapon, by the way, means one that doesn't kill immediately, it takes a few years, such as the Soviet Union, or as it is known today, Russia, have a standard 100 times less than Canada, at 10 microwatts per square centimeter. Salzburg, Austria, 0.0001 microwatts per square centimeter, 10 million times more stringent than Canada. Even the Salzburg levels are 1,000 times more than the amount needed for a cell phone connection, and presumably that for a Wi-Fi connection. Levels far more than the natural background measure that mankind has evolved over millions of years to withstand. The Canadian standards are even worse when one considers they do not consider the effects of near-field radiation, which according to Industry Canada can be as much as 10 times the expected calculated amount in some locations. Dr. Robert Kane, a senior radio frequency researcher for Motorola, felt the near-field zone could be spikes of up to 100 times the radiation. At 100 times the radiation allowable under Canadian standard. This allows for one to be exposed to more than the amount of radiation a home microwave oven produces. Would one willingly sit inside a microwave oven at full power for 6 minutes? I have no idea how much radiation I was exposed to, but to cause instantaneous heating, the intensity must have been very high. There was no safety manual with the unit I used, no warning to stay out of the beam, no warning that my workstation was within the near-field zone. The best advice I can give people so they will not suffer from radiation as I have is, if you must use a microwave emitting device, read your safety manual and ask yourself if, in order to meet the Canadian standards, one must hold the cell phone 20 millimeters away from the body, how much further from the body should they hold the phone to be safe? No one's arms are long enough to hold them outside the near-field zone. Do they want to be sleeping and living in close proximity to a smart meter or near-field zone of the meter?